Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give it a moment for everyone to enter the room. Okay. I'm going to begin. My name is Suzanne Adely, and I am one of the chairs of the National Lawyers Guild International Committee. I'm also one of the recent past presidents. I'm a labor organizer, and I'm on the steering committee of the U.S. Palestine Community Network and Labor for Palestine National Network. This webinar came together with the efforts of different individuals, including current and past co-chairs of the National Lawyers Guild Palestine Subcommittee, and some of our allies in Labor for Palestine, CUNY for Palestine, and International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. So thank you, everyone, for your help. Thank you for all of the panelists for joining us at such short notice, and thank you, everyone, for attending. The impetus for this webinar actually came when Huwaida and I were having a discussion over online with each other when we both expressed the sentiment that we felt at another stage of being at a loss of like what to do as lawyers and as activists at the current stage of the genocide, in particular in the context of the siege, and with the knowledge that for more than 2 months, there has been no aid that has been allowed to enter Gaza, food or any other kind of aid, and that our consistent reports of men, women, and children who are attempting to acquire any of the food and other aid that's left in Gaza are being targeted and murdered by the Zionist forces in the most horrific ways. And we decided that we were going to organize an online meeting in order to talk about the next sort of phase of strategies, both in the United States and internationally. And we thought that we would coincide that meeting with the sailing of the second Freedom Flotilla. And then 2 days, I think, after that text conversation that we had, we heard that one of the ships of the flotilla, the Conscience, was attacked by two drones. And thankfully, none of the passengers were hurt. But it is another sign of the complete and utter disregard that Israel and the international community has for international law and human life. And it created more urgency to have this conversation. And so I want to now move to introducing who our moderator for the evening, who is Dylan Saba. And I actually met Dylan almost, well, I think we might have been in some spaces together before, but we really met in person almost a year ago in Turkey when he and I were preparing to leave with the 2024 Freedom Flotilla, along with hundreds of other activists from all walks of life who came from all around the world to really stand up and risk their lives to try to break the siege and do what the international community has failed to do. And so remembering meeting Dylan at that time and knowing the work that Dylan does, I wanted to sort of introduce, include him in also in this conversation. And I'm just going to introduce him really quickly and then ask him to take over. Dylan Saba is a civil rights attorney and writer who lives in New York City. He works at Palestine Legal, where he represents individuals and groups in the US who are facing suppression for supporting Palestinian rights. He has written about Palestine and other issues for a variety of publications, including The Nation, N+1, Foreign Policy, Jewish Currents, American Prospect, and The Baffler. Thank you so much, Dylan. Oh, before you start, I just want to let everyone know that we are going to have hopefully about 30 minutes of question and answer time available at the end. And if you have questions that you want to ask, please use the Q&A app that's at the bottom of your screen.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, early evening for this panel. It is really a profound honor to share the virtual stage with everyone here. These are all folks who I admire a great deal for their work and their long commitment of to solidarity and justice for Palestine and for liberation more broadly. And I've had the honor of meeting some of the folks here speaking today as a part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. From last year, and I just continue to be uplifted by their brilliance and their hard work. So you're all lucky to be hearing from them today. I don't really have much in the way of grounding remarks. I think Suzanne really said it all. This is a very difficult and harrowing time to watch as the genocide in Gaza continues with the full support of the United States, and of course, at the hands of Israeli forces on the ground. As Suzanne mentioned, no aid whatsoever now for over 2 months since the resumption of the genocide and the collapse of the very fragile quote unquote ceasefire that briefly took into effect. And the just total abdication by the international community, by states and other actors in the face of gross violations of international law, and the rights of Palestinians under the Genocide Convention and many others. So I'm going to just briefly introduce the panelists, and then we'll hear from each of them. Folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat because we will be reserving time to go through those questions. Yes, so again, I appreciate everyone joining on relatively short notice. So we'll move to the introduction of the speakers. We have with us today Callie Akuno, who's an organizer, educator, and writer for human rights and social justice. Callie is a co-founder and director of Cooperation Jackson, which is an emerging network of worker cooperatives and supporting institutions. Cooperation Jackson is fighting to create economic democracy by creating a vibrant solidarity economy in Jackson, Mississippi, that will help transform Mississippi and the South. Callie is also the co-editor of Jackson Rising, the struggle for economic democracy and Black self-determination in Jackson, Mississippi, and the author of numerous articles and pamphlets, including the Jackson Kush Plan, the struggle for Black self-determination and economic democracy, Until We Win, Black Labor and Liberation in the Disposable Era, Operation Ghetto Storm, Every 28 Hours Report, and Let Your Motto Be Resistance, a handbook on organizing new African and oppressed communities for self-defense. We also have with us Michael Fakhri, who is a professor at the University of Oregon School of Law. He has taught courses on the right to food at Harvard Law School, European University Institute, and the University of Arizona Indigenous Governance Program. He's delivered lectures on international human rights and development topics at universities in places such as South Africa, Egypt, Lebanon, Qatar, Singapore, Italy, Switzerland, Iceland, the United States, and the United Kingdom. He has also led public dialogues on human rights and development with peasant organizations, labor unions, and human rights activists in the Arab region and North America. He was appointed Special Rapporteur on the right to food by the Human Rights Council in March 2020 and assumed his functions on May 1st, 2020. And we appear to have lost him, but hopefully that's just him being shy and he will jump back on. Next, we have Huwaida Arraf, who is a Palestinian-American human rights attorney and activist. Over the past 2 decades, Huwaida has been involved in a number of legal and grassroots initiatives for Palestinian rights, including as co-founder of the International Solidarity Movement. She was one of the initiators and organizers of the first delegation of lawyers to enter Gaza following Operation Cast Lead, and co-authored the report on their findings, Onslaught, Israel's Attack on Gaza and the Rule of Law. Huwaida is the former chairperson of the Free Gaza movement, and from August to December 2008, led 5 successful sea voyages to the Gaza Strip to confront and challenge Israel's illegal blockade on the 2 million Palestinians living there. She was one of the primary organizers of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla and was traveling with it when it was lethally attacked by Israeli forces on May 31st, 2010. She continues to work with U.S. boats to Gaza. Finally, Ann Wright is a retired U.S. Army colonel and one of 3 State Department officials to publicly resign in direct protest of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Ann is a member of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla Steering Committee and was also a passenger on the Challenger 1, which along with the Mavi Marmara was part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla. Since then, she has been writing and speaking out for peace. She fasted for a month, picketed at the U.S. prison in Guantanamo, Cuba, served as a juror in Bush impeachment hearings, traveled to Iran as a citizen diplomat, and has been arrested numerous times for peaceful, nonviolent protests of Bush's policies, particularly the war on Iraq. She has been on delegations to Iran and was in Gaza 3 times in 2009, following the Israeli attack on Gaza that killed 1,440 and wounded 5,000 Palestinians. She was an organizer for the Gaza Freedom March that brought 1,350 persons from 44 countries to Cairo, Egypt, in solidarity with the people of Gaza. And she was on the May 2010 Gaza flotilla that was attacked by the Israeli military, and is also an organizer for U.S. boats to Gaza, the Audacity of Hope, in the 2011 Gaza flotilla. She lives in Honolulu. Okay. We still have not regained Michael. Is that right?
Yeah, he just texted to say that he's trying to reconnect.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. So we were going to start with him, but why don't we instead start with Anne? So Anne, one of the reasons that we are convening here and now is because the Gaza Freedom Flotilla is back in action and there is a mission currently underway. So can you share with us about the current mission, what's happening in Malta, what are the objectives of the current Gaza Freedom Flotilla, and what happened recently with the drone attacks on the Conscience?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for organizing this on spur of the moment. And it's, critical time, as Suzanne mentioned, all the horrific things that are still going on with the Israeli genocide of Gaza, the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. I mean, it's just about more than all of us can take, and yet nobody's doing crap to stop it except the Houthis. And so our little boats, our little vessels that from 2008 onward, and Huwaida being a part of the beginning part of this and all the way through, um, these little boats that are trying to be the messenger for citizens of the world that we hate what our governments are doing, the support they're giving to the Israeli government as they kill Palestinians by the tens of thousands. And so these little boats are just a symbol of our outrage of it. And as you and Suzanne and Huwaida were with Istanbul last year, where we hoped we would have 3 big vessels that were able to go and show citizen outrage, and then the Turkish government halted the movement of those, and one of the flags taken off of them. And I mean, we're very used to bureaucratic law warfare, as well as being killed and wounded and beaten up by the Israelis if you ever get close to getting into Gaza. But I'll tell you what, this last one here, we had 40 people that had come from all parts of the world here in Malta, ready to get on board one of the ships that was finally freed out of Turkey, the Conscience. I mean, the conscience of the world, for God's sakes. And then what happens to somebody bombs it. We've never had aerial bombs ever hit one of our boats. We've had helicopters descend on it, commandos descend on it, killing passengers on the top of the Mavi Marmara, going into the Mavi Marmara, murdering 10 people, wounding 50, and other flotillas. I mean, we have in 2008, 2010, 2011, 2013, 15, 16, 18, 24. This is the first time anybody's ever dropped bombs on us. And it just shows the pure evilness of the state of Israel. Although we don't yet have the parts of the bomb that will go back to Israel and back to the United States, who undoubtedly furnished these bombs. But we definitely know that an Israeli C-130 Hercules was circling around our vessel, having flown from Israel to Malta and then returning to it. So in my eyes, I would say we pretty well know what happened. And, you know, the audacity of having a genocide that the world is not stopping, except the Houthis sending some missiles in there. But then the audacity that Israel thinks it can get away, and it is getting away, with coming across the Mediterranean to a European port, bombing an unarmed civilian vessel, bombing it and hoping to sink it. And they were hoping to sink the 40 people that were supposed to have been on it. Our delegates were supposed to have been on it that day, but because the flag of the ship was pulled the afternoon before, we didn't, similar to what happened in Istanbul. The night before we were going to board you all onto the Actins, the flag of the Guinea-Bissau was pulled. Well, this time, the flag of Palau, one of the great supporters of the United States. I mean, the U.S. buys off Palau with millions of dollars at free association. So actually, it's no real surprise. The real surprise was the Israeli military flew an airplane over and bombed those things. And I mean, nobody would have ever predicted that thing. But no one would have ever predicted that there would be genocide going on in Gaza. Then no one would have protected there's no 2 more months that not one damn thing has gotten into Gaza. Nothing. No food, no water, no nothing. And the world sits by and does piddly squat nothing other than words. So these little vessels are important because they are a symbol. And we have hundreds and hundreds of people that want to do something like this, willing to risk their lives. And as we now know, I mean, really risking their lives. Not only were they killed on the Marvy Marmot 15 years ago in 2010, but the Israelis are going after trying to kill the internationals that are merely standing up to say, you've got to stop this genocide. It's so outrageous, so terrible. And I hope every single person that's on this webinar will go to whatever Israeli embassy, consulate, whatever it is, and give them hell again. And also, don't forget the good old United States of America that's furnishing all of the weaponry for it. Our government is so complicit up to their eyeballs in all this stuff. The Biden administration sucked, and the Trump administration is going along right with the same thing. So here in Malta, where we're dealing with all of the fallouts of that, where the international community has really not said anything. All they say is, oh, you're supporting Hamas. Oh, you have weapons on board your ship. All this crap that's for not true, but it's, you know, it's the propaganda that Israel puts out all the time, and the US and the world media pick it up. And if I sound a little angry, it's true. I am, and I'm fed up with the whole damn thing. Thank you very
Thanks, Anne, for that update. Can I just ask a quick follow-up, which is, are there any specific demands that you all have right now with respect to your vessel outside Malta, or any way that folks are able to support or apply pressure that you want to uplift right now?
Yeah, support for the government for furnishing for Israel that can prompt on civilian ships. All the bombs that they're dropping on the people of Gaza. It's working through the whole thing of that. But the main thing is just to keep after our government to stop supporting the genocide that the Israelis are doing on it. And if you want to work on the flag issue, help us get a flag from some country. This it's we're chump change compared to really what's going on in the world. I mean, what's going on in Gaza. We're just a tiny little thing and we're international, so we get some attention. But the amount of attention that's been given in the last 2 months in the starvation of the people of Gaza is pitiful. So we don't want the attention just to be on us because we got bombed. They're getting bombed every second of the day. So just keep after our government, keep after the Israeli government, and try our best to end this horrific, terrible, evil thing that's going on in our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And I think that's a good transition. Let's now turn to Michael and hear from you a bit, Michael, about the situation in Gaza, and particularly with respect to food insecurity. So from your perspective as a UN official, what can you tell us about what's happening in Gaza right now, in the context of access to food and other vital aid? How is Israeli military policy affecting access to food for Palestinians in Gaza? And also how is US policy impacting the situation as well?
Great, thank you, Dylan. And just from the outset, I'll say I'm not a UN official as such. So I'm a UN Special Rapporteur, which makes me an independent voice within the UN system. And I think that distinction is important because me and my other colleagues, the other mandate holders, are able to speak freely, and we're also able to describe things the way they are. So let's start with a bit of context. Of course, that Israel began its blockade against Gaza 25 years ago. So if we look at what was Gaza like October 5th, 2023, 50% of people in Gaza were hungry and 80% depended on humanitarian aid. So that's just coming in from the last 20 years. Then on October 9th, Israel announced its starvation campaign. So on October 9th, 2020, Israel announces its intent to use food and humanitarian aid as a weapon against the civilians, against the Palestinians in Gaza. And sure enough, that's what they did. So that by December 2023, we could say every person in Gaza was hungry. In January 2024, the International Court of Justice releases its first round of its first provisional decision, and Israel ignores the court, so that by March 28th, 2024, the International Court of Justice recognized, in the context of genocide, that there is starvation and famine in Gaza. In November 2024, the International Criminal Court then issues 2 warrants, one against Prime Minister Netanyahu and one against the former Minister of Defense, Gallant. And at the core of the warrant is the war crime of starvation. This is the first time is a charge under the international criminal system for the crime of starvation, and it is to Israeli officials. And those are still good, and they've yet to be executed. So part of those warrants include crimes against humanity for the mass murder of Palestinian civilians. In July 2024, the myself and several others, experts in the UN human rights system, declared a famine. So we saw enough evidence to declare famine across all of Gaza. So going into this year, during the so-called ceasefire period, this was between January 19 and March 18 of 2025, during this period, Prime Minister Netanyahu again announces another round of starvation. So on March 1st, Netanyahu announces Israel's intent to block all humanitarian aid from entering into Gaza. And that's what's happened since. So we've over 60 days where no food, no water, no humanitarian aid has entered Gaza. So on March 31st, every bakery in Gaza shut down. The World Food Program had the last bit of bakeries. They shut down. On April 25th, the World Food Program said, we no longer have any food in Gaza. And what we hear from Israeli officials and from their allies, from American officials, is acknowledgement. They are saying that they are in effect using civilian lives as leverage. So what they're saying is the reason Israel is denying humanitarian aid is part of its negotiations with Hamas. What's that mean, really? So not only are they using civilian lives, more specifically, they're using children's lives. So in that period of this March, between when Netanyahu announced this round of starvation, if you compare February 20 to 2025, you will see an increase of child acute malnutrition increased by 80% in just 1 month. That's what Israel's using as leverage. Food prices have skyrocketed in the last couple of months. The range is between 30% to 1,400%. So what food is there in the market is inaccessible, and people are running out of food. This is the context. This is the context of the situation. I mean, I've said it so many times that this is the fastest starvation campaign in modern history. We've never seen so many people starved so quickly and so completely at any point in modern history. So there's no question that there is famine. There is no question that there is starvation. There is no question that this is in the context of genocide. Where we're at now is in this moment of people trying to do something and being punished. I'll add one more element of statistics and context, rather. This is the humanitarian that have been killed in any modern war. And Israel attacked the UN itself, both in terms of the UN. And what I've heard ambassadors say is that when Israel it's attacking the world. And yet countries are feeling constrained. They want punished politically and economically. But we also see countries that sorry, my connection dropped. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, and maybe it's actually we can hear you better if you stayed off camera too, if you want to try that.
Yeah, I'll do that. There we go.
Michael, we were able to
hopefully
hear
this
you
will be
very
better.
clearly, and where you started cutting out was when you talked about attacks on humanitarian workers. So
Okay.
do you mind reiterating that point one more time?
Yes, thank you, Dylan. So what we're seeing is record numbers of attacks against UN staff and record UN staff killed, record number attacks against humanitarian workers. We know Israel has targeted humanitarian convoys that have gone through. So humanitarian convoys will coordinate with the Israeli forces, and nevertheless, there are over 20 reports of the Israeli forces targeting humanitarian convoys within Gaza itself. This is the context that we're in. And so in talking to ambassadors from around the world, what they're saying is when Israel attacks the United Nations, when Israel attacks UN convoys, when they attack humanitarian workers, when they shoot at peacekeepers in southern Lebanon, when they attack the UN system by naming the Secretary General persona non grata, when they attack the human rights system, they're attacking the world. And so the world has recognized that that Israel is attacking the UN system itself, and the world knows it's genocide. And where we're at is how to get countries to respond. And countries are either too afraid to respond to what's going on in Gaza because they're afraid of being punished by Israel and its allies politically and economically, or they are hypocritical in that their political rhetoric suggests that they want to do something, but we're not seeing actual action. We're not seeing actual sanctions. We're not seeing actual consequences for Israel's actions. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was a really robust presentation. I just have one follow-up question for you, which is you spoke a lot about what Israel is doing here. Can you speak just briefly to the role of the United States and in particular the defunding of UNRWA that was announced early last year and the implications of that for for access to food in Gaza?
Yes, what we saw that started with the Biden administration is before we get to UNRWA specifically, what we saw under the Biden administration is basically the United States exiting international law and not even trying to justify their actions and their support in terms of international law. And to give you some background, even during the Iraq War, even when the United States did not have any factual basis for the invasion of Iraq, the United States still tried to justify its actions in terms of international law during the invasion and eventual occupation of Iraq. Now, and the torture of people. So the United States even tried to justify torture through international law. What we're seeing that started with the Biden administration is an exit by the United States from international law itself, and then continue under the Trump administration to stop funding not just UNRWA, but a lot of different parts of the United Nations. What's at stake with UNRWA is the main lifeline for Palestinians, mostly Palestinian refugees, but in Gaza, for all Palestinians in Gaza. Second, UNRWA also protects the rights of Palestinians. So they are the protector of their human rights, and especially the right of return of Palestinians. So that's what's at stake by the attack against UNRWA. So the US is complicit in genocide. US is complicit in starvation. The complicity of the United States is clear because the United States is the largest military supporter of Israel. The second, of course, is Germany. Back to you, Dylan.
Thank you, Michael. And I will just add, kind of jumping out of my moderator role here, that Michael spoke about Israel's use of starvation as a weapon of war, as a way to compel political concessions that it has failed to win through military force on the battlefield, and that is, of course, in direct contravention of international laws, has been recognized in the ICC warrants. But the U.S. itself is also no stranger to these strategies as well. And while U.S. has abdicated its responsibilities under international law and has recently shown a kind of gross disregard for the kinds of commitments that it had paid lip service to in the past. If you look at the long history of the United States as a colonial power in the world, and I'm thinking in particular of the US's intervention in the Philippines at the start of the 20th century, the use of kind of proto-concentration camps and control over aid flows and food flows to compel a new political reality is an old tool in the US toolbox. So thank you for allowing that brief intervention. Let's shift now back to talking about the solidarity movement and the Freedom Flotilla. I'd like to turn to you, Huwaida. For decades now, you have played a really critical role in building international solidarity to interrupt the Zionist occupation and really target the siege on Gaza. Can you just speak to the Freedom Flotilla's mission more broadly and why it's important? Why it's so important now, and also what are some of the main obstacles to its success? You're muted. Oh yeah.
Thank you so much, Dylan, and thank you so much to the National Lawyers Guild for hosting this and everyone for being here. Yeah, for people who don't know the history of the Freedom Flotilla, I'll briefly go over that by saying that it was born out of its predecessor was the Free Gaza movement, and the Free Gaza movement was born out of activists with the International Solidarity Movement, which I was also very active with. And the whole idea with the International Solidarity Movement was really to globalize the Palestinian Intifada and to provide is support for Palestinian popular resistance against the colonization of their land and the deep oppression that had been ongoing for decades, because we know the resources that Israel has, right? It has the complicity of the entire world, the active support of the United States, but Palestinians resisting alone were being slaughtered and then blamed for their own death. And so back in the early 2000s, we put out a call for people from all over the world to come to Palestine and to stand with Palestinians in order to provide that resource and strengthen their call in the ways that Palestinians were asking for. And at the time, we were able to have internationals in the West Bank and internationals in Gaza. In 2003, some of you might remember that Israel killed one of our colleagues, Rachel Corrie. Shortly after that, it killed another one of our colleagues, Tom Herndal, all within weeks. And then it killed another British journalist who wasn't with us, but Israel was killing internationals for which it was getting some criticism. Of course, it gets none for killing Palestinians, but instead of actually changing some of its policies or acknowledging what it was doing, it just decided to close off Gaza to internationals. So ISM couldn't access Gaza anymore. And then in 2006, 2007, Israel strengthened its stranglehold on Gaza, completely cutting it off and severely restricting what could get in and what could get out. And so people with the international solidarity movement, like, what can we do? We can't access Gaza, protesting, all of these things doesn't seem like it's enough. We have to intervene. And one volunteer had an idea of trying to sail a boat to Gaza, which, to be perfectly honest, I thought was ridiculous and didn't want to pursue that at the time. But a number of committed volunteers did pursue and spent time fundraising with the idea that we are going to sail a boat and we are not going to accept this closure. We are going to challenge it. And even if it is in a small fishing boat, we have to show Israel that we are not accepting their control over Gaza and what they're doing. And this small team, not me, I was in law school at the time, but really pulled together the resources and the people. And then I joined in Cyprus to set off towards Gaza with the idea that we're not turning back, right? We didn't really think that we were going to get in, but we wanted to at least highlight to the world what Israel was doing was unlawful. It had nothing to do with security, as they always say, because here are a few people, we were 44 people from 17 different countries on 2 fishing boats. I mean, we weren't any kind of security risk. So people in Gaza were inviting us. We have a right to go. What is Israel's business in stopping us? Right. And as Anne said, and Suzanne also alluded to, nobody wants to risk their lives or die or anything like that, but we're so committed to this idea that when our governments fail, we just can't accept what is happening, this trampling over international law, over the right to life, and all of our protests are not yielding change in policy. And so we're not going to accept this, and we are going to show that people power can defeat even one of the most powerful militaries in the world. And so we are setting sail, and we are not turning back, no matter what Israel does. And we did set sail in August of 2008, and until almost the very last minute, thinking they're going to attack us. But at the last minute, Israel actually backed down, and we became the first 2 small boats to sail into Gaza's port in over 40 years without Israel's permission. And if I'll just briefly say, that's one of the most beautiful moments of my life, because you see an entire people who are being annihilated, really annihilated, with the active complicity of our governments. Everyone that was on that boat was mainly from the United States and Europe, right? And yet the welcome and the love and the gratitude from Palestinians, for we weren't bringing humanitarian aid, we just had ourselves, right? But the Palestinians were so grateful for that solidarity, and that people would take to the sea and try to reach them in this way as they were being starved to death at the time. Because even back in 2006, 2007, you were getting reports saying there were rising rates of malnutrition, pregnant women are rising rates of anemia, and Palestinians that needed medical care and were being denied it were dying also, again, because they can't have access. Israel's, restricting what can get in and then denying people the right to go out for the medical care that they needed. So even in 2006, 7, and 8, you had these statistics of the effect of Israel's unlawful blockade. But what did you have from the international community? Nothing. Reports from the UN, which are important, obviously, but if there are no actions to stop the atrocities, to hold perpetrators accountable, then what? And it is that kind of lack of inaction that has brought us to where we are today, that Israel's not even hiding anymore what it's doing, and it can escalate to the extent that it has escalated to what we're seeing now, that it is bragging about its policy of mass starvation and extermination. So, we got in at not only that in August 2008, but we succeeded in getting in and out 4 more times and actually managing to take some people out of Gaza that needed medical aid without going through Israel, without getting Israel's permission. But the first time Israel started attacking us is Operation Cast Lead, when we tried to send an emergency boat at the end of 2008. And then every successive attempt after that, Israel attacked us in one way or another, trying to sink our boats, ramming us, commandeering our ship, and arresting everyone on board. And then in 2010, we escalated, and instead of sending 1 or 2 small boats, we built a flotilla with people from all over the world and had 7 ships set sail in May of 2010 towards Gaza, which Israel launched a lethal attack on, killing 10 of our colleagues. If they thought that they were going to stop this movement, they were wrong, because we didn't stop and we continued. The movement has been ongoing with various effects to reach Gaza. And after October of 2023, we thought it was more important than ever, not just to try to sail 1 or 2 small boats, but to get big ships, as many people as we can, load the ships with as much humanitarian aid as we can, not because we could carry enough for the needs of the people of Gaza, but because we needed to inspire others to do what we had been trying to do, because our message was always that we are, yes, this civilian initiative, we're trying to open an emergency or sea route to get to Gaza, but we can't do it alone. We are trying to inspire others to follow us, get your own boats, international organizations that are right now waiting with their trucks in Rafah. There are reportedly 3,000 trucks waiting in Rafah, and for over 2 months haven't been able to get in. Our message to them is drive through, collectively go. Like, what, you're not going to get Israel's permission, and you shouldn't wait for Israel's permission, because we know what Israel is doing, right? We're going to try by sea. You there that are on land, don't wait. It is abhorrent that our countries, again, aren't putting pressure and are accepting of this world where that Israel is trying to annihilate the Palestinian people. They're on trial for genocide, and yet you think it's fine to collaborate with this system that Israel is allowed to control what gets to the people that it is trying to exterminate. Like, that is just something we can't accept. And as we do this, we continue to call on our governments to do the right thing. So far, they have not, but we have to keep up that call, but show that we are going to act when they don't. And so this is one form of action, but as I said, and I hope we grow. I hope some of you listening can think of your ways that you can also join us in this way, but also other things that are done at home, of course, is so important. And I know that a lot of you are doing that, from organizing boycotts and divestment, organizing labor unions, to also to, for example, refuse to unload Israeli ships, or to block boats, to block Israeli ships, and things like that. And also trying to push for the political change that we need to see on the domestic level in our various countries. We need to do all of it. We need to continue to do all of it, because it really is I think all of us have lost the words, really, to describe the horror that we are witnessing, not only the devastating, deadly effect on Palestinians, but the fact that we can live in a world where our government's forcing us to watch and pay for the mass starvation of an entire people. And I say that it is equivalent, if not worse, to watching Nazis march people into gas chambers and then looking away. Why worse? Because back then, at least, we didn't see it. A lot of people didn't know. They could say they didn't know what was going on. Today, you very much see what's going on, and we have our governments justifying it. And to us, this is a world that we can't accept. And we really are at a precipice that this is what's happening. It is, our governments want us to accept that, yeah, they can do this. And it is, screw international law, right? It is the law of the jungle here. Might is right. And the weaker parties, people, aren't protected. Or it's us. who are saying, and no, we're not going to accept this. We're going to fight for every life, and law is important. Protecting every life and making sure that we respect the dignity and the right to life of every person is important. These are the two kind of things that are battling up against each other right now, which is why it's so important that we put everything forward, which is why it's so important that Anne, despite her life and her loved ones and everything else, is there. Despite the fact that I have kids and I always want to come home to, I'm not in Malta now. Last year I was, and so many other people are. It's because we realize that today we're fighting for certainly saving Palestinians from this extermination, but tomorrow it could be anybody else. This is all of us, and this is the future that we are going into, and which ideology, which worldview, which world order is going to win out, I think is all at stake. Lastly, I'll just end with saying, I think you all know, I probably don't need to say it, but I just will, in that, we're emphasizing the humanitarian aid and the dire humanitarian crisis right now. But forever we've been saying that this isn't about humanitarian aid. Palestinians have never wanted handout. They want the right to live in freedom and dignity, to work and to feed their children. And so right now, where we're emphasizing the humanitarian aid, it's all about changing the policy, of course. And so it's not just about aid. It's the rights that we are fighting for. So let me end there and listen to our friend Callie, and then hopefully take some questions, unless you have a question for me, Dylan.
No, that was a very beautiful presentation, Huwaida. Thank you. It's very powerful to hear your articulation of what strikes me as the enforcement of international law from below, right? We have world powers, the United States, Israel, that are seeking to destroy international law and its protections, and trample over the post-World War II world order and system of international institutions and systems of protections that were ostensibly implemented to prevent the kinds of genocide that we're now seeing play out once again in plain view of the world. And yeah, I think that the kind of state of inaction from the international community is incredibly difficult, harrowing, devastating to witness. And I think there's something very powerful about non-state entities, us grassroots organizers, taking on risk and taking actions to remind the world of its obligations, and to act, because I think you're absolutely right that what we're seeing play out in Gaza now will not be contained to Palestine, and that there's a very dangerous struggle for the future underway right now. Finally, I want to turn to Callie. You've been doing really incredible work for a long time in the United States, fighting for Black self-determination, for economic democracy, but also remaining rooted to your commitments towards international solidarity. I'd love to hear you just share with folks a bit more about your work, how you see it as connected to internationalism, and in particular, the struggle for Palestinian liberation. And then if you can speak to what you see as the role for grassroots organizations and collectives, such as the ones you're involved in terms of intervening on behalf of Palestinian liberation.
Well, thank you, Dylan. I ask everybody to forgive some of the background noise that I may have. I'm in transit, currently in Atlanta, Georgia. Was at a Resist and Build summit that our organization, as well as the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network and many others, work to build, to kind of continue building and advancing the movement for economic democracy here in the United States. We found ourselves in a very strategic place, that being not too far from Marietta, Georgia, where Boeing has a factory that produces the very aircraft that just bombed the flotilla. And so trying to use this moment over the past weekend at this gather to both educate and build more solidarity and direct links to some of the current struggles that are taking place here in Atlanta, the one I would cite, and hopefully everybody, if you don't know about the struggle to stop Cop City, to learn about the struggle, because these Cop City initiatives are popping up very intentionally all over the United States, and are now just being even more fortified on account of this latest executive order that the Trump administration just issued, which is basically ending, let's be very clear what they're doing. They've ended any fundamental right to self-defense of communities, because this law or this executive order, let's not call it a law, right? Because it's a decree by fiat that just only has the if you want to call it, the legitimacy of the force that the United States federal agencies can bring to bear, whether it's law or not. And I'm glad that we are having a conversation not only about the end of international law and the United States government abandoning international law. I would argue that in many fundamental ways, it was always at best selective in its application of international law. And as it regards to Black and Indigenous, Latino, Puerto Rican, Hawaiian, Guam, you can go down the line. They've always been selective in their application of their own quote unquote constitutional rights. But we now live in a new period where because of the deep crisis of capitalism, because of the kind of rising competition, not only from China, but from many of the countries in the G77, and then probably more in particular, one could cite the BRICS, wherein the world economy and the weight of the world economy and the political influence it has is shifting away from Western Europe and the United States more towards China and the global South. And so in the face of this competition, they are limiting rights of any and all scope. And this has been going on for a minute. It's not like this is new. We've definitely, I would say, been charting this kind of rise in this restriction of quote unquote bourgeois or democratic rights since September 11th, if not before, but a definite qualitative shift that happened in September 11th. And we need to be very mindful that this is a bipartisan affair, just as, I think Michael spoke to the fact, everybody spoke to the fact in one form or another, that the Biden administration really set the tone for the genocide and ethnic cleansing. And if you look at where Congress is now, the vast majority of the Democratic Party is still full on in support of continuing the genocidal ethnic cleansing policies, despite the mass movement that is amassed in the United States to kind of protest this. Now, I'm not saying that our social movements have been ineffective, because I think part of the actual effect, the impact of the movements has actually elicited an even greater kind of repressive response. So much like, we look at this new proposal of, I believe it's HR 867, this bill that's being pushed in the House, which if passed, will make it a fine of, I think it's looks like $100 million, or my figures may be off, but the most critical part is like 20 years, up to 20 years in prison for engaging in any kind of boycott, divestment, and sanction activities targeting the state of Israel. Now, this just already adds on to the deep criminalization of the BDS movement in the United States has been going on, not only on a federal level, but a state by state level. And so this is just really a ramping up of that, and it has a bipartisan kind of orientation to it. But we need to be, very clear that this is a fundamentally a Western program. And what do I mean by that? In many respects, we see the limiting both of the freedom of assembly, the freedom of speech taking place in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Italy, in parts of France or throughout France, but in some parts very particular, also in Canada. So this is very much, the kind of the old settler colonial powers and states replaying and reinforcing each other and their particular ordering and structuring of the world system that they amassed through a very deliberate policy of colonization, genocide, enslavement. And this is just kind of a reinforcement of that, I think, from a historical perspective. And what that means to me, and I think hopefully to all of you, is that, indigenous people, Black people, we have to find ourselves in this particular struggle and be in deep joint struggle and solidarity with it. Because what I'm citing is they're already limiting our fundamental rights to be involved in the active promotion of both human rights and the right of human emancipation. And what they're doing to the Palestinians, they fully intend on bringing home to the United States, and they are in active scenes in many regards. It's very clear that the Trump administration is aiming to just disappear citizens in mass, quote unquote, citizens in mass, who will be of any political opposition to him, and send them to basically death camps in El Salvador, or whoever else they can get, to house folks. But keep in mind, if you think this is kind of me being outrageous, keep in mind that we witnessed Guantanamo being used for the same purpose without as much fanfare, again, in a very bipartisan way, starting with Bush, continued under Obama, perpetuated under Trump 1, continued by Biden, now being forced and expanded in that regard. Now, our work, has always been focused, fundamentally on building the base of our own community in Jackson, which Jackson, for those of you who don't know, is predominantly Black city, over 80% Black, deeply impoverished, meaning, systematically deprived of resources, deprived of opportunities to kind of play within the existing world structure and to keep us basically at a subsistence level so we can be exploited in a readily available and cheap working force. You're not unique in that in the United States, or particularly in the South, or throughout the world, but that's a particular piece that we've been trying to reverse. And we've been very keen in our work of what we called, and you had cited a little bit earlier, dealing around what we call the disposable era. And one of our arguments around cooperation, Jackson, that we first kind of really witnessed in 2005 around Hurricane Katrina, that a new phase had basically kind of been entered around the United States government, that the warehousing strategy that they had of mass incarceration of Black people, kind of to deal with some of the deep economic pressures and what to do with the population, which is largely unwanted. Our labor is no longer fundamentally needed within the overall economy due to automation, restructuring, massive and very intentional super exploitation of migrant workers, that Black labor was no fundamentally needed. And we've always been very keen to try to situate our circumstance and understand it in context in light of what Israel has very systematically done with the Palestinian population, basically since the first Intifada, going back to the 1980s, where there's been a very intentional labor replacement strategy to eliminate any basis of major disruption to the Israeli, to the settler society and economy, which has rendered it, more vulnerable to this program of ethnic cleansing and genocide. And our argument, look, what you see now is the result of inaction that has basically taken place since Oslo, that the United States government in particular set it up so that really the teeth were removed, from the Palestinian resistance, and weakened the international community and binding it into a certain set of agreements that limited the legitimacy of what folks could do in terms of defending themselves and fighting for folks' right to self-determination. So we've been trying to counter that in our work, both for our own people, but for all oppressed people, right? We're internationalists, always were and always will be. One integrated world that we have to live under, and we have to find some ways to live within the ecological limits and live in harmony with each other while doing so. So that's what we're fighting for. Now, just briefly, I want to say this is a particularly unique period that we're in, because uh, whether you want to call it neo-fascist or whether you want to just call it, the authoritarian right, they have a international, which is a growing international that's very committed towards defending Israel and very much using what Israel is doing, I would argue, as a precedent for how they aim to keep control over the global economy and keep any kind of rivals from emerging, and very much using it as a case example of challenge us, and this is ultimately what will happen to you. And this is not just my own analysis. I applaud the Colombian president for making very much a similar point several weeks ago, and others kind of echoing that. There are some very concrete reasons why the West is doing that, and why Trump was so bold and audacious to threaten very openly, Iran with being bombed and being eradicated off the face of the earth. I think is the language that he used at one point. And so we find ourselves with limited kind of the democratic space, but within that, we're going to have to really, just picking up on what Huwaida said, we're going to have to really rely on building a mass movement of international solidarity that's willing to take on embargoes, that's willing to press, the nation states of the world. And if they don't do it, that we do it ourselves to make sure that the weapons aren't, moved and shipped around, that food actually gets delivered, and putting ourselves, through nonviolent direct means and any other means that may be necessary to directly intervene to make sure aid gets where it needs to go. That Israel and all the different governments that need to be and have to be held accountable for not. I would say it's beyond being complicit in genocide. Like they know exactly what's going on, as has been said, and that's beyond complicity. That's actually encouraging it, sustaining it, and enforcing it to reshape the political map and political realities. And so we have to, Germany, the UK, France, all the major weapon suppliers, we have to stop them, and we have to really press our people in the mass movements to take this up. And for that to do that, we're going to have to use a combination of almost everything in our toolkit, from mass demonstrations to direct actions, to really put ourselves in the line of fire, if you would. I hate to say it like that, but just keeping it real so that we send the clear message home that this has to stop, and we intend on stopping it. And in the face of the clear challenges, I wish that we could outline a regular task. We can do 1, 2, 3, 4, and this will get that outcome. We know now from almost 2 years, well over a year and a half of the student intifada, the constant protests, growing international movement has definitely been birthed from this, but it still hasn't been enough yet to press a different outcome. So we continue to have to grow. We continue to have to utilize all means. We cannot stop, because the stop would mean to just then also allow these very same countries to use these same repressive tactics and means to be used against us, to discipline us. So this is in our own self-interest, no matter how you stack it, to be in solidarity and make sure that this genocide and ethnic cleansing stops.
Thank you so much, Callie. Really very powerful to hear you expound on those connections, and in particular the deep resonances between the Black struggle for self-determination in the United States and the Palestinian struggle, and the resonances across those forms of oppression, the creation of disposable populations, the use of warehousing as a tool of demographic engineering and repression is a powerful reminder of the solidarities between these two struggles. Thanks to all of the presenters. We've got about 20 minutes left, it seems, and there's a number of questions that have come through the chat, and they're kind of in some groups here, so I'm going to try and wade through them a bit, and direct them where it seems appropriate. Perhaps, Michael, we'll start with you. There's a number of questions about various potential efforts that could come through the UN system So there was one question about the possibility of a UN peacekeeping force. And there was another question about the potential role that the UN General Assembly could play, adding pressure on member states to take action or to intervene in some capacity. Would you be able to speak a bit towards the possibility of actions that could conceivably take place through the UN system?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Dylan. So right now, it's going to sound weird to say, but we have a lot of tools now in international law to use. Usually the criticism is international law is not being applied or it's falling short. I think we have those tools, and I'll outline what they are. Some of them are. So first, we have the International Court of Justice in the case regarding the illegality of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories. And that decision just came out relatively recently, a few months ago. What's important about that decision is not that that the International Court found the occupation illegal. Yes, we all knew that. But it's that the court said, and that governments have an obligation to impose sanctions against Israel until it no longer occupies those territories. So it now has authorized governments, not just authorized, obliged governments to impose sanctions against Israel to end its occupation. This is in the broader sense. So what countries can do right now and must do right now is sanctions, and not just sanctions against settlers or canceling a military purchase here and there, but full-blown sanctions against the state of Israel, and they are obliged to do so. Second, we are seeing that the General Assembly is being used more and more as countries know. We know predictably that the Security Council is a waste of time. Why run anything through the Security Council knowing how the vetoes are going to play out? So the General Assembly has the powers under a provision what's often referred to as the Uniting for Peace provision, because the language is in the context of uniting for peace. Where there is a deadlock at the Security Council because of a veto, the General Assembly can authorize many things, including the use of force. Well, we don't want them to authorize the use of force. What we want them to authorize in this context is to break the blockade. I mean, of course, we want them to recognize the Palestinian right to self-determination and the right of return, which the General Assembly regularly does. But we want something more specific. So we can imagine the General Assembly, under the Uniting for Peace provision, passing a resolution calling upon maybe UN peacekeepers or authorizing any government to lend its armed forces to deliver and to humanitarian aid to break the blockade, right? So we can imagine the General Assembly being used more robustly. Another thing that people are talking about is unseating Israel from the General Assembly. And what that means is this: only the Security Council can expel a country from being a member of the UN. But the General Assembly during the apartheid era of South Africa did something where they couldn't kick out South Africa. What they said is, South Africa, apartheid South Africa, you're not allowed to take your seat at the General Assembly. This is the unseating. And there's now talk of unseating Israel from the General Assembly. I mean, that would be helpful. That would be incredibly powerful. But that's why I put that as like the third option. And finally, again, to bring it back to to the topic of this webinar, we see grassroots movements enforcing international law, but countries have made it virtually impossible. Countries are not meeting their obligation to prevent genocide and to prevent starvation and famine. It is a universal obligation. So when humanitarian groups want to use ports in the Mediterranean Sea and have wanted to fly flags to bring in their ships, countries are making it very difficult, if not impossible. So people can pressure their governments to support these civilian convoys as well, to open up their ports, to actively support these efforts to break the blockade. Over to you, Dylan.
Thank you so much, Michael. Okay, the next kind of grouping of questions I want to touch on is around international solidarity, which kind of follows up from the last point that Michael was just making. So there's one about the Houthis and Yemen and what they're doing. And then there's a couple about the Egypt border, which I'll kick to Huwaida, but I can just speak to Yemen briefly. Um, Yemen is engaging in military confrontation to impose a blockade through military means of Israel as an action against Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. And what the US has done in the face of this, instead of applying the massive amounts of leverage that it has over Israel, Israel's largely working with American, not only American weaponry, but American diplomatic cover at the United States, at the United Nations, right? So instead of using that leverage to compel a ceasefire, which Yemen has said would end its military campaign against Israel, the United States has waged war on Yemen. We've seen today that the US and Israel and other nations, potentially UAE and others, have engaged in the bombing of civilian ports in Yemen. Right, that is an abomination. It is, I mean, it is again itself war crimes and war crimes that are committed in defense of genocide, war crimes and committed in defense of other war crimes. So what does that mean for us? Our obligation, those of us in the United States, is to pressure our government, right? Impose a ceasefire in Gaza, pressure Israel to negotiate in good faith and accept the ceasefire terms that have been on the table for months and months and months now, instead of bombing Yemen, that is acting in solidarity with the Palestinian people. That's what we can do. There was a couple other questions, and Huwaida, I'll kick them to you. Um, and they're about your suggestion that trucks waiting at the Egyptian border drive through to Gaza. The question is around how can we encourage that, and also what is the role that Egypt is playing at the border, and how can we pressure Arab countries and also Turkey to end their complicity with the siege of Gaza?
That is a very good question in terms of what kind of pressure can be put on Arab countries or these non-democratic countries in order to stop in its kind of complicity and participation in the siege and genocide of Gaza. And they are actively, and not only that they're not doing anything, they are actively complicit. If we're looking at Egypt, well, first and foremost, responsibility is on Israel. But Egypt is participating in this in that it refuses to defy Israel's closure, right? It doesn't have to abide by it. And they frequently cite, like, privately or maybe even publicly, that they have this, peace agreement with Israel, that a Camp David, peace agreement with Israel, and it stipulates certain things, and Egypt cannot violate that. But at this point, really, you're holding up your peace agreement with Israel as a reason for allowing genocide. But we also know, as was mentioned before, the extreme pressure that the United States puts on these countries, and not mainly economic, really, for a lot of these countries. Egypt receiving a lot of the United States economic military aid, and it doesn't want to be sanctioned. It doesn't want to lose that, and so it's not going to defy it. And it's not only that they're stopping people or not allowing trucks to go through at Rafah, but people who want to go in solidarity and trying to march there, they're stopping people from actively even getting to Rafah, like to get out of Cairo or where they are in El Arish. So a lot of people can't even find themselves getting to Rafah. Although I know that there was an initiative last year. There are more planned to try to put on that pressure, and I think it needs to continue. We need to keep calling it out, embarrassing them, especially the Arab countries, because Arab and Muslim countries can form can get beyond their rhetoric and their platitudes and actually form a very strong bloc with a lot of influence, economic and otherwise, that can counter US pressure. And they don't do it. They want to stay in the good graces of the United States, and some countries like the UAE and others are actively working and supporting Israel, which is just a shame. And they are, any sign of solidarity with Palestine in these countries like the UAE, you can get arrested for wearing a keffiyeh. So you can't protest. So it is shameful. I think we need to keep calling it out as much as possible. Turkey, in the same way, last year when we were going to set sail, yes, we had our flag pulled, but eventually we got a flag back, and then Turkey would not let our vessels go. They eventually released one vessel, but two other vessels that we had that were supposed to be part of this flotilla have not been. And it's not just Turkey. When we started the Free Gaza movement and the 2010 Gaza flotilla, we left from Cyprus, we left from Turkey, we left from Greece. All of these countries now won't let us leave. No country in the Mediterranean will let us leave. And that's why last year we had a lot of media around our Freedom Flotilla, because that contributes to safety. This year we couldn't even do that. We did not want to do any media until we were safely out of the territorial waters of any country in order to stop this bureaucratic sabotage, which means what? That not only these countries not doing what they're supposed to do, but they're actively stopping us from trying to stop a genocide. So it's really shameful. And those that are in these countries, and especially those that have the popular, very strong people movement in these countries, Greece, Italy, others, can put that kind of pressure on the countries to at least, they should be doing their own actions to sanction Israel, to send their own aid, and to break through Israel's blockade, but at least stop hindering us and sabotaging the civilian efforts that are doing this. So these are just some of the obstacles that goes to show you just how complicit all of these world countries in what Israel is doing, are part of this genocide. As Kali said, it's not, obviously it's Israel, but Israel couldn't do it without everybody else. I think so. In terms of what can we do, with the Arab countries, it is certainly difficult. I think we just continue to shame and call them out. In those that have strong people movements, are allowed to protest, I think we put those protests in, especially on countries in the Mediterranean. And there are various efforts, I think, that have been posted on the chat and whatnot about trying to get through Egypt again. And those who want to join, like the Freedom Flotilla is not going to stop. Yes, our vessel right now needs a lot of repair. Hopefully we can get even more vessels to come with us. Please contact us, freedomflotilla.org. We have I think most of you are in the US. We have the US affiliate of the Freedom Flotilla, which is usboatstogaza.org. And if you write to media@usboatstogaza.org about possibly getting involved, we will try to get back to you. We're inundated, but we need all the participation that we can get. Did I answer sufficiently?
Yes, thank you, Huwaida. Suzanne, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to say that we actually took a delegation to Egypt in November of 2023 to try to, and the intention then was not even just to cross the border, it was just to reach the border in order to bring attention to the siege. And it was at a time when our colleagues in Cairo told us that they thought that it would be feasible, they thought that it would be possible. And we were actually getting ready to leave one morning, in which we were told then that our permissions were retracted. And then some of the delegates that we were a part of, went to the US Embassy to try to talk to people within the US Embassy, and were not able to do that. And we're trying to hold a brief press conference, and then were detained and arrested. And we have reason to believe the US Embassy actually were the ones that alerted the Egyptians to the fact that they were there. And that was a week before the national call for internationals to come out. And I think a sort of a similar thing had happened, and a group of other activists were deported. But I think, I agree with Huwaida. I think it's a matter of, if there's the momentum, right, then it's a matter of like putting diplomatic pressure to allow on these countries to allow the bare minimum to happen.
If I may, just, I know that there are risks for some more than others, but I will repeat something I've been advocating for a minute in various circles. I do think that in terms of pressure on some of the Arab and Muslim countries in particular, some very sustained and targeted demonstrations at their embassies, consulates, intersections in the United States, Europe, and Latin America in particular are well worth engaging in. And to mitigate risk against folks who may have their families targeted for their relatives in those countries protesting. Those of us who don't have those connections, I think it's incumbent upon us to be in solidarity to take those actions up. Now that means that since we're not quote unquote his constituents, it may be ignored, but it won't be ignored if these actions are tied to addressing some of the various investments, particularly some of the Gulf countries have with like sovereign wealth funds and some of the things they're doing. I'm gonna bring up, Michael, some of the things that you're talking about, food sovereignty, particularly on the African continent, but also in Latin America, where they're making substantial sovereign wealth fund purchases of land, food, farming, things of that nature. Those things we need to do sufficient research, and I think target those in direct alignment to bring their investments in line with what their political interests are and what the political interests are of the people relative to stopping the genocide and ethnic cleansing. I'm hoping that folks, we can start moving somewhat in that direction as just one of the type of actions I think we can and should be taking at this point to really make them do what they should have done all along.
Thank you all for those really thoughtful answers. We only have a couple minutes left, so I think let's just do one final question here. And Kelly, if you don't mind, I'd like to just stick with you. There was comments made about recent actions from within the U.S. labor movement. So it appears that there was a resolution under consideration from the Longshoremen Union in California. We know about solidarity actions taken at various ports to block the boats, and there's certainly been quite a number of resolutions passed through various locals, calling for divestment and making other statements. So I guess the question is, what do you think the role is of the U.S. labor movement in this struggle, and also any potential limitations that you foresee?
Let's ignore the limitations because there are too many.
Okay.
The names, and let's push
Yeah.
and towards the positive. The positive is that what I've seen in the last 2 years now, there are a good number of young rank and file members, particularly in the ports and in the trucking industries, who are fully conscious, who do not want to be complicit, and I think are looking for more connections with community to force the leadership of the internationals to take a more bold and principled stance. And I think it's incumbent upon us to work with these kind of independent left activists within these unions to come up with a number of direct action pieces, when and where possible, to have the sanction of the leadership and the resolutions, of course. That would be more powerful, to be more official, be more sanctioned. But we're going to have to start with pressure from below and moving and intervening and make sure that there's a union and community, intersection that I think we're going to have to press. But I think we need to be very clear. We're going to need a combination. I think in the United States, we need a combination of all the different sectors that work in the ports and in the transport section to really make an impact. So that's rail workers, that's the truck workers, that's the different porters. And some of that we need to be mindful, like a good number of the truckers, they're not actually unionized anymore. so that they're quote unquote independent contractors, many of them. But we still do need to press the Teamsters, and that's going to look different in different areas in different states, so it will be uneven. I think we'll have no choice but to work with the uneven nature and figure out how our political organizations, our civic organizations, can reinforce those to give them cover, to make sure that there's kind of a flooding of the zone when these actions are taken, and that they have a mass force and a mass presence that back the independent kind of labor-led forces that are willing to engage. I think that's the stage that we are in, that will give a little bit more impetus to the leadership to kind of take stronger steps. And if I may, I would actually say we really need this most importantly in the South and in the East Coast. So we're really looking at the ILA more so than the ILWU, and ILWU has a much more radical history than the ILWA. But despite that, most of the shipments are coming more from the East Coast. That's why I'm stressing that more on the East Coast and the South. And so we have to press on that. And that is really going to take our organizations and our communities to go organize with those in the trade unions in the various sectors and really move them and push them. This is the next critical step, I think, has to be taken by our movement to really, press the issue on stopping the weapons being, delivered, moved, and even constructed. If I dare say, that's a critical step we're going to have to take.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of the panelists and Suzanne for convening us here, and everyone for taking the time to listen. This was really a really great event.
Dylan, can I say one thing really quickly? Yeah, because I think somebody asked, like, how can we get the trucks to just drive through Rafah and whatnot? If anyone here is listening that is part of these humanitarian organizations, I think it's taking the initiative and organizing amongst yourselves. What happens is that these humanitarian organizations usually don't want to be denied access to Rafah. They want to do their humanitarian work, obviously. And Israel has a right to sanction and kick out. We see what it's doing to UNRWA, et cetera. So none of them want to, in a sense, defy and then get banned and prevented from doing their humanitarian work. But if it's no one's getting in right now, if it's all of them together, it's got to be a collective action. And personally, I think it needs to be done. It's not a radical thing when people are starving and you're being blockaded. They're in this ghetto concentration camp that nobody's getting to. You have to break down the walls of this concentration camp. And all of those trucks can do it, but we have to, again, do it together. So just, I'm not involved with any of those humanitarian organizations, but just kind of putting an idea out there for those of you who are.
Any more last comments before we end? Thank you, Huwaida. Thank you so much, Dylan, for moderating. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kali. And I will send Anne our thanks. Good night.